All right. We're recording. Here we are. I think this is episode 25 or something crazy like that. This is Roaming Free Inside the Cage, William Schafer. We are still in chapter 3. We started this last week or the week before. And this one, it's getting more practical as we go, less abstract theoretical and really getting into the practicality. So this is really good. This chapter, Enneatype as a protector of the ego, has been interesting in just helping us to understand how our primary means of dealing with the experiences of life and expressing those experiences um, really acts as a shield around the ego. And so if we're going to really understand our type, he's saying in real time, in our moments, we need to be aware of the feelings, the sensations of how our type works in different situations. And so he's been going through this. And we actually read the two paragraphs that I want to start with last week, right at the tail end of this discussion of the nine passions. And we spent some time talking about the passions and what they really are. They're the emotional drivers, the unconscious emotional drivers of our type and the way that we process in life. So now we're talking about how we perceive that type in action. And I wanted to reread these first paragraphs just as a lead in to the new material this evening. And so we won't spend a lot of time on those first two paragraphs, and then we'll slow down and dive in more line by line afterwards. Before I do, before we do start reading, anything from last week, anything that we needed to develop a little bit further, or you had some comments on, thinking about? Oh,
Dave?
Lindy, mute.
Where do
Yeah.
where did we leave off last week?
We left off on the last week. We left off on page 41.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're going to start back on the last two paragraphs of page 40,
Mhm.
receiving type in action.
Dave, I had
Yeah.
just a observation
Hmm.
because I'm a two, and you'll love this. So before the last two classes, I would say I'm a two. Now I say I'm a two. I'm
Are you saying you're not as thrilled with your type anymore?
not as thrilled.
Oh, is this because of the
But
passion and what it looks like?
yeah, well, and that's the other thing. I struggle with the word passion. I don't like that word. I don't think it accurately describes um, mm, the energy or the push toward whatever it is we're unconsciously trying to avoid.
Well, do you
Um,
like the word vice better?
I actually do.
Do you
It
really?
feels more accurate, feels more
Uh-huh.
honest. Um, because to me, you can have passion for so many areas in your life, and it's good and wonderful, and it helps, and it builds relationships, and it does all those kind of things. So that's a tough word for me.
Were you
But
here? Were you here when I put up on my shared the screen on that kind of lengthy definition of passion? Were you here for that one?
yeah, oh,
Okay.
I wasn't, but I watched it online. But the problem was it was on my phone, so I couldn't really see it well.
Okay, I did. I'm
Um,
pretty sure I included it on the email. So it was
okay,
there.
I'll
And
go
that's one of
back
the
and look.
reasons that I wanted to do that because passion is such a loaded word for us. And it means something so different, but just once again, where is it?
But I do see these, Becky, a little bit like an Achilles heel is kind of the way I look at it too, with each number. I mean, I guess you could see, but your definitions of passion were very good, Dave, once we went through that. But it is a hard one to get our arms around, I think.
Yeah, I like
And help.
Achilles heel. That
Mhm.
fits,
But I
right?
also think, Dave, when you described your passion for music, I thought, well, that's okay, isn't it? And then I realized that almost anything can take too high of a position
Mhm.
in your life if you're drawn to it.
Hmm.
Work is good, but you could be a workaholic. So you could have, a passion that just grows and grows and you don't find the balance.
Right, right. But they're using passion a little differently. But this is what I thought was so important for us. A powerful, intense emotion or strong liking for a person, activity, idea, or cause, often involving deep enthusiasm, desire, or affection, leading to fulfillment and motivation, and can range from a hobby to a driving life force. And it also refers to suffering. Originally, the word from the Greek means to suffer. So that's why passion is used, for the last week of Christ's life. But this idea of a strong emotion, a deep interest, a motivation, and the range of it from romantic love to creative pursuits, intellectual interest, spiritual devotion, intense suffering, and so on and so forth. Um, that's the origin of the word passion. Now, the way it's applied here to the Enneagram, it's doing the same thing. It's a strong emotion, it's a motivation, right? And it's involving this deep desire or affection leading to this motivation, so on and so forth. But the way that we're using it here, it's something that is negative in the sense that it's limiting us. So it's also called a vice, but it has the same pull as the passion, as we understand passions in a positive sense, have that strong pull, that almost like an undertow that's going to pull us in. But in this case, it's something that is limiting as opposed to the virtue. So you got the passion and the virtue, or the vice and the virtue of each Enneatype. But I think the reason that passion is being applied here is because it has that unconscious drive and motivation and emotional content to it that it can't be ignored, as a person. And so I think that's the reason that the word is being used.
The other thing that I thought about, because I had trouble with pride until I read the part for a two that is about it's created by a conviction that only I can do it, that they're all depending on me.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and and that was easier for me to get, like that fit.
Mhm.
And and so it made me wonder about for everyone else with different types, if that works for them too, that rather than going to what the unconscious um, vice or shadow word is, that is more about those behaviors.
Mhm.
And for me, I think the behaviors started first, and then I developed a sense of pride about them
Mhm. Mhm.
because I know those behaviors in me started really young because of my birth defect and my parents who were overwhelmed. Um,
Think about,
that,
basically ACA, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. So you've got kids who are growing up in very dysfunctional families, and many, especially older siblings, end up having to parent their younger siblings because the parents are out to lunch. And so they end up having to do all of these kind of advanced, responsible, activities and chores out of order in their lives, but they learn very deeply that they can do it and they're the ones who need to do it. Isn't it natural for that to then present later on in life as I'm the only one who can do it and I've got to do it and it's my responsibility to do it? And that looks like maybe a prideful thing, from
well, and
outside
then
looking
builds
in.
because then you get really good at it, and
Mhm.
then you do have the pride, like I can do it better than other people, right? And then if you got a one wing, it makes it even worse.
Yeah.
Huh, William? He knows I have a one wing. Yeah, it's
Dave, I think of I don't know, some of you guys probably done the Strength Finder that Blanchard has done. It's got all these traits of everybody throughout their careers, and it comes out with your five strongest strengths. And I remember, Becky, as you're talking about, as you get older, you kind of refine those strengths and get better and better at it. And, gift, if you will, but he makes the comment that if it becomes overbearing, it becomes your greatest weakness.
yeah.
I thought that's a good balancing. It's encouraging to be able to identify the strengths that we have individually and be able to help those grow and mature, but to keep in mind that there's a balance to it.
Mhm. I
Yeah,
think the
and obviously
person
the
who's
passions are out of balance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm thinking of, we think of passion, something that's really strong. I think of somebody who's in love. That's a wonderful thing. But if the passion of being in love is all consuming to you and you're just totally engrossed in that and nothing else in your life matters, or you start to neglect other things, you're going to start to look cuckoo to everybody around you and you're going to just be all consuming. So I can see you take
And
any
then
one
be
of those
cuckoo.
passions and say, what's that?
I said, and you're going to be cuckoo.
And they're going to be cuckoo anyway, but you can look at that list and see any number of those passions. If those are all consuming of you really, and it's kind of the underlying undercurrent as you were talking about, Dave, you can see if that's really pulling at you, it's sort of overwhelming, and then the balance is off. So I kind of see it that way
Hmm.
too.
So on page 38, starting at the bottom, this is where he goes through each of the 9 types and frames them the way that Becky was talking about. And so it may be helpful for you if you know what your type is or you suspect what your type is, to take a look at that. For instance, the anger of passion of the anger, the passion of type 1 does not mean a propensity for mayhem. It's not anger the way we normally think of it. It amounts to an unconscious internal stand against reality the way it is. That's something that,
So cool.
as Ellen would say, we all do that. We all have this inability to accept life as life is, at least at times. But a one would take it to kind of take it to an art form, I suppose. It manifests as an urgency to judge and to criticize, born of an unexamined belief that when the Godhead created the universe, she or he somehow goofed. And so
That's
if
one
we
thing.
look at if we look at that anger, we say, well, anger doesn't really characterize it, but does this sound a little bit more like you? Does it frame up this way rather than just what you normally think of anger? Lori?
Oh, I forgot, but mine, I remember looking at my passion, which is avarice, avarice,
Avarice.
Aberrant.
and I'm thinking, really? And then it goes into what the other thing it said hit home like crazy. It's a felt need to carefully guard my time and space against the intrusions of others, based on the unconscious belief that they will absorb my energy and leave me depleted if I let them.
And
That's
that worked?
oh yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm not proud of it, but yes.
And so avarice seems a little weird because we think of that as greed, but
Yeah,
but
but it
but
is
what
great.
is greed but trying to arrogate to yourself and hold on and dam things up, and that would be the sense of avarice in this way. So
It's hoarding.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
But because he uses words like avarice and lust but there's a negative connotation with that. But to me, it's judgment. But to me, it's also like if you're guarding your time, like I protect my time, my personal time. I don't want it to be um leaking
Yes.
into my work, nor my work leaking into my time. I don't see that as avarice. I see that as self-protection.
Okay, Ellen, once again, if it's not a problem, it's not a problem. This is when it gets out of balance that it becomes a problem. So if you take that setting of boundaries, which is necessary for all of us to do, but you take it to such an extreme that you really are cutting off any real connection with people and cutting off the time that we all need to spend with each other, then it's a problem. So if it's not a problem, it's not a problem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we have to judge
Russ,
when that is. We're the only ones who really can. I'm sorry, William, go ahead.
yeah, Russ describes avarice as like a closing of the heart, like a protecting my emotional energy,
Writing that down.
right? And I think the greed is the mental fixation, whereas the avarice is the emotional, the passion.
Okay.
And
That's a
I
good distinction.
Now
I like that.
you just said a lot there.
and I think avarice can lead to greed, right? Can show
Uh-huh.
up like greed sometimes, but it's a different thing. And again, it has this passive reactive
flavor to it where it happens automatically, right? And
Mhm.
you can try to be extroverted and spend time with people and be loving and open and so on, but it's draining.
Mhm.
You need to kind of retreat back and recharge, often by yourself.
That's why I have to get to the middle of the range.
You get it right.
Yeah.
Middle of the wheel.
So now more to Becky's point, if you look at the last paragraph on page 39, as you can see, the passions do not place very high on the scale of desirable human qualities. That's why she was a 2 and now she's a 2. Perceiving them in action generates sufficient self-criticism that most people avoid noticing them. See how that works? We don't want to know this about ourselves. We don't want to admit this about ourselves. This is the whole purpose of having a type. A type is simply a collection of habits that more or less guarantees that you will not consciously experience your particular passion.
Mm.
We get so good at acting this out and having it rationalized and justified in our minds that we don't even notice that there's a passion driving us unconsciously toward this. We think we're looking at it and we have rationalized it as some kind of virtue, or we use the characteristics of our type to deflect, so that we never even get to the point of being able to really realize the passion that's underneath that. Whenever you engage in the habitual preoccupations of type, you will probably be spared the unpleasantness of recognizing that you are indulging in anger, pride, vainglory, envy, greed, fear, gluttony, lust, or sloth. And that feels good, which is why learning to feel your type in action is so hard. Perceiving it will at first make you feel worse. And this is the basic reason why type is so stable throughout the lifespan. The more skillful type's activity becomes, the less you experience the passion that fuels it.
So the only question I have about that is, again, I'll reference a 2 because that's all I know. Sometimes giving and caring for others is a good thing, and it's not coming from pride. So I am not clear on how I can feel the difference. Um,
Can I take a swing at that one?
yeah.
Absolutely.
My understanding of this is that when we're in the giving position, right? Like the giver is up here and the receiver is down here, right? So the giver is always in the advantageous position. Like I have more knowledge. I can tell you how to fix something. I can give advice, often unsolicited advice. Um, you know, and just that dynamic of being up here and being in that giver role, that naturally begins to breed the pride. And the opposite of pride, of course, is humility. So by just humbling myself and not thinking that I'm giving because I'm in a better than kind of role, which is all unconscious, I am giving only because God gave to me first, and all the glory
Oh,
goes to Him.
okay, so let me give you an example.
Mm.
My husband had cataract surgery today, and he's real sensitive to medication. They gave him way too much anesthesia. So it was rough coming home, and um, I felt nothing but love and caring for him. Um, and so but I was paying attention to this because I was thinking, okay, is this pride? I don't think this. I just love him. What the, but that's that's what I can't. Mm. I
Well, I
get
want
what you're
to,
saying.
yeah, I understand what too, because I wanted to comment to Becky too when you said something about the pride it was that I can do things better than you. So we were brought up, my family, we were brought up as children to be self-sufficient,
Mhm.
to not depend on others. And many of us, me and my siblings, when we're in trouble, it is so difficult to ask for help. It is so difficult to receive help. it does take humility to say, I need help,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it is humbling to say, I need help.
Yeah. And I think it's okay for us to be proud of the things we should be proud of, right? Pride is different than being proud,
Right. Yeah, it's two different things, actually.
right? Like,
Right.
like I can be proud of the fact that I'm a humble person. Right.
That's what they call humble brag. No, no, but I understand. Like, I'm proud of my daughters,
Yeah.
but yes, it's a different one. Whereas I am too proud to ask for help, even though my daughters are starving. That's different.
Okay,
Right.
so to bring this back to Becky's question, how can you tell if your natural tendency to do whatever your type would have you do is healthy, balanced, or not? And for me, the bottom line is, and always has been for any of these kinds of questions, is how does it affect the nature of our relationships?
Mhm.
If we are doing something in a healthy and balanced way, then our relationships are going to reflect that. They're going to be closer knit together. They're going to be balanced themselves. There'll be that give and take between. And if they're not, then our relationships are going to start to suffer. If your tuneness gets out of hand and you are tending to everybody, then maybe your relationship with your husband is going to be suffering, and that relationship is going to get fractured. If your two-ness moves into codependence, maybe you'll see a fracturing there. But I
Mhm.
think if we are watching the quality of our relationships over time, I think we're going to have that reflection back of how balanced we may be. But ultimately, you know, what we've talked about in here, our whole reason for being here as human beings on this planet is connection. And so if everything that we're doing is fostering greater connection, then we're doing all right. But if it's not, then something is amiss. And that can be, I think, the light on the dashboard that helps us to navigate. But I think that for me is the best way that I can tell, because I had so many things, especially earlier in life, so rationalized and so justified, and yet I wasn't paying attention as to how it was affecting Marion, especially with respect to the pastorate and the drive to do this and do that for God, and I wasn't paying attention to how it was affecting her, the kids, or maybe other people. So I think to pay attention there too and to be sensitive to the state of your relationships may help you. Bill had a hand up.
Dave, I was just going to say that, sometimes I think that connection is affected by not our own actions, but by the other person's perception of who we are. Give you an example. When Gail and I moved from the Dakotas down to Austin, Texas, um, where we grew up, it was not good to show wealth. And when we moved to Austin, every other car was a BMW and a Mercedes. This is early 80s.
Rings on fingers.
And we were at a church that was on the west side of Austin that was very affluent people around there. And I realized how much prejudice I was bringing in towards them from where I came from. And I felt that also when I moved back to South Dakota. Um, I remember one of our grandparents said, "Well, who do they think they are?" kind of a thing. And it was kind of an awakening for us to see that while we may be okay with the way we are living our life and individually, somebody else would look at us and judge us in a way that would affect that connection with them.
Mhm.
Mm. Mhm.
One of the things that's great, and one of the things that Schaefer says is that if you're having trouble finding your type or understanding certain things, ask, you know, and if you don't feel like you can ask, then like Ellen says, maybe that's part of your problem, you know. But yeah, ask some friends and ask them, what do they see? Um, because they're seeing things in us that we don't see in ourselves, and vice versa. And so it needs to be kind of a collaborative effort. I don't think, certainly sobriety doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a community. And I think spiritual formation is exactly the same way. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's going to happen in a community. That's why it's so important to see what is this fostering. That's why we call this place the effect. We're interested in the effect of all this that we say we do in a spiritual way, and not just looking at those things, in isolation or in a vacuum. How does it affect our relationships? How does it affect all of these things around us, other people?
Dave,
I like Bill's comment there and how subtle it can creep up on you when you're thinking, look at these audacious people who are flaunting their wealth. Like I can look down on them.
Yeah.
I can judge them in some way. And I'm judging it from a position of I'm humble, I'm modest, I'm so and so, and I'm over here and they're over there because they're dressing up and driving a fancy car.
See, that's what my comment too for Bill. When my pride too is that you're flaunting your wealth and you're looking down on me.
Hmm.
Huh? Who are you to do that?
Right.
Right? That's my prideful
Yeah.
thinking too. It's like, well, then you're not worth to be my friend anyway, if that's how you judge me and others
Right.
who
Yeah.
don't dress up
Yeah.
and flaunt our wealth.
Right.
And going back to Dave's point, then we have a disconnection, right? Like,
Mhm.
and we have a disconnection from me being in the righteous, humble
Right?
place. You know?
Right. You're doing everything what you really in a balanced way before God in your heart. You're feeling like, no, I'm not being out of line. I'm not being prideful, but it still has a great effect on some people close to you.
Mhm.
I think the other example I give was my older brother is 13 years older than I am. And he was always kind of my surrogate dad because my dad was 45 when I was born, so he was older. But my brother always had high aspirations for me. And what was weird is that the more I applied myself and finished things and succeeded at things, the worse our relationship got, the more uh,
Hmm.
he went down.
he just kept going further down. And he got to the point where
Mm.
he didn't even want to be around me because he wasn't applying himself and his
Hmm.
life was being consumed by depression and alcoholism. So
Hmm.
it was nothing I could do about it other than love him as best I could. But it was just, I was married. He felt like I was able to leave town and move on with life, and it was just a weird connection that started dissolving. The more, yeah.
Hmm.
So that was, I guess that's my only point is that sometimes it has nothing to do with how you're being. You may be as whole and in the center of the wheel as we're talking about with all your balance, but it still doesn't mean that some of the people close to you are going to feel more connected with you because of that.
Right.
Absolutely. That's why Jesus said, didn't come to bring peace, but the sword.
Yeah.
And the division is going to start from those closest to you in your own household. So as soon as we try to go down a path, it's going to create divisions.
Yeah.
And those aren't on us, not necessarily. But
I was going to make one other point too. It's interesting that Schaefer, he points out like on the bottom of page 39, I wrote in the footnotes for myself, we avoid sharing our passion. And I think what he's trying to say is we do want to hide it. And I can think of circumstances with myself or maybe with friends or family members where, you're just in a normal exchange with someone and you're discussing something or whatnot. And all of a sudden, someone's passion starts to show, like they start getting angrier and angrier. And everyone starts to say, why are you getting so angry? And then all of a sudden the person's like, oh, my anger is showing. I have to go back in my shell. And then, you kind of protect yourself, like Schaefer's saying, you really want to protect yourself from that. So I can see people doing that too, kind of hiding their passion. I think we all don't love our passion maybe for the, for the Achilles heel that it might be. So I think we tend to want to hide it a little bit too. And I can see that. But like your point, Dave, having the connection with somebody enough that you know and trust to say, you're really starting to get angry here, and I'm not sure I understand why. And then you can catch yourself and say, oh, am I getting angry? Thanks for pointing that out. I didn't realize how angry I was getting. Wow. Okay. And so you can still keep the connection with that person, but it doesn't happen with everybody, probably just people that you trust.
Mhm.
But part of the art of all this is having the reflection enough that if a relationship fractures, kind of like what Bill's talking about, is to take a look, what's my part in this? Is there any part in this for me? I remember making the statement that always brought howls of protest, that your relationship with God is only as good as your worst relationship with another person. Your relationship with God is only as good as your worst relationship with another person. My thought is that that worst relationship becomes your glass ceiling. That's your place of unforgiveness. That's your place of whatever it happens to be that shelves off your other relationships. And so someone came to me, kind of like what Bill is saying, is my sister hasn't talked to me in 10 years. And my point to her is that, well, that's not your worst relationship. That's her worst relationship. And we have to be able to see the difference. If what we're doing is causing offense in somebody else or resistance in somebody else or a fracturing relationship, it may not be that we're doing anything wrong, need or should change course or direction or intensity. It's something that they're just going to need to deal with or not. It's sad when relationships fracture that way, but maybe there's nothing that we could or should do about it. But we need to have that reflective capability to really take a look at that and try to figure out if there's something that could have been done differently to preserve relationship. It's complicated because everybody is oscillating at their own frequency, and we're trying to find some cohesion in all this, and it's difficult. But I think the more that we walk down this path, the better we get at being able to gauge some of these things. I mean, Becky, it would have been horrible if you weren't caregiver to Doug when he came home. That would have been terrible. So of course, that's something that you needed and wanted.
So I shouldn't say to him, you're on your own because, I'm not doing that helping thing anymore.
Probably not a good thing. Yeah.
So I have one more question. As we're going about trying to break through to different behaviors, and this is probably for Kathy and William, how does shame enter into it? And is that a part of every sign, a sense of shame as we're trying to behave differently?
I do know that the heart types, the type 2, 3, and 4, they are the types that struggle with shame. Like shame is their primary underlying emotion. So, for example, as a 2, if you're a giver and you give something to somebody and they don't reciprocate, or they don't thank you, or they don't do something that's
Whatever's expected.
yeah, whatever that transaction is, right?
That's not what's so hard for me. Probably because I'm old and I've learned to not expect anything coming back, but to ask for help,
Right.
that would bring up shame for me.
Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, when I humble myself, I can ask for help. And if I'm humble, then shame does come at me in the same way as when I'm prideful, right? Like pride causes shame, right? Humility is the
Wow.
blessed are the humble, right? Humility is
Yeah.
the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Well, and while I was on vacation, I read a book that a friend gave me, a Christian book about self-empathy. And they talked about how if you don't have the self-empathy, then it's very hard to get close to Jesus. And because I'm able to give compassion to everyone else, but it's very difficult to give compassion to myself. And I feel like, yeah, that's kind of the part of when it, kind of didn't really make sense about the sloth, but in this book, it had like these different assessments, anger, the one that really stood out for me is that there was a worry assessment, and I scored 15 out of 15, and they said if you score over 6, you should be calling our Soul Shepherd hotline. And I'm like, I'm a basket case. So I don't know if it was shame, but I think I'm just lacking that self-empathy. And that may be the same as shame, but I'm trying to change my ways. And it's funny though, because like I had this little episode and I said to my friend, I'm staying positive and I'm not worrying. He goes, well, I'm calling you because you were a basket case. And I said, well, I feel like I'm making progress because normally I would have a panic attack. And so sometimes your friends can't even see the changes that I feel like I'm trying to, claw my way out of this, sinkhole. But I just have to stay positive about it. And
And isn't it interesting? If you can't find empathy for yourself, or as Becky often talks about, that fierce self-critic, and think about why that would be. You're holding yourself to a higher standard than you hold anybody else. You're expecting more out of yourself than you expect out of anybody else. You should be able to do this, even though others can't, and you have empathy for them. And so there's that pride again that's coming in a different sort of way. And so those are the kind of things that if we start to become aware of them, and as Schaefer's saying, if we first become aware of the sensations, because those are the things that are actually happening in real time. And so we can kind of monitor those as we become more aware. And then we can sort of reverse engineer from there and get back down to more of the bedrock. But all of this in the way of being able to move transformatively, as we go forward.
There was a technique a friend said about, you have compassion or empathy for others, but we find it actually difficult for ourselves. And what she said is, pretend it's your friend that's going through this. It is you, but pretend it's your friend. What would you do or say? Right?
Yeah, that's fine.
it.
That's good.
Yeah.
But knowing where that's coming from is going to be the important thing, because that's what's way down deep, and that's where we need to start that, getting to the root of things so that we can start to let go of them. And then the humility that William's talking about comes back into play.
Yeah. One of my favorite thoughts from Russ on this idea of pride, like people who are givers, their hearts are with others, what other people need. And their hearts, they have a difficult time being with their own hearts and being with their own needs. So even when love is offered, they might not be able to receive it because they're not at home. They're somewhere else, right? And we miss the love that's being offered because we're expecting to be repaid in the way that we loved, right? And that creates another little hole in the bucket there.
I was listening actually to one of these online comics of all people, and he had this great line. He said, "You know what happiness is? Happiness is your current situation minus your expectations." I thought that was pretty darn good.
Dave, can you say that again? You cut out just for a second.
Happiness is your current situation minus your expectations.
Mhm.
And what we've been talking about is happiness is enoughness. When the moment is enough for you, that you don't feel you have to add anything or take anything away for it to be just right, that's a kingdom moment. That's happiness. He's saying exactly the same thing, but it's pithier. Happiness is your current situation minus your expectations. And so think about all the things that we're talking about ourselves. If you can't find empathy for yourselves, if there's this or if there's that, think about how much your expectations are driving that. And you may not even know what those expectations are because they're buried down in the unconscious. And they're coming up through as this passion, this emotional driving force that you don't really even understand. You're acting it out on remote control, but you don't really understand. That's what this is all about. Getting a handle on that, driving the awareness forward so that you can start to understand why the tail is wagging the dog. And you can disentangle from that.
And something to what you said, William, also that I've read about some of the numbers and in particular a two, there's a phrase they refer to as a person that can be a gives to get.
Mhm.
And that's a different kind of giving because you're giving with the expectation of some sort of reciprocation or admiration or a certain kind of response. And so if you don't get that response, there's could be some bubbled anger or resentment there, and a two that's out of I guess you could say maybe in a maybe unhealthy or a stressful state. They're giving and giving and giving and giving, and they're going overboard and they're not getting what they need back. And so they're starting to spiral. And so that could be like a worst case scenario of a person that gives to get. And so you have to just be a giver, but not a person that gives just to get, because that's a recipe for disaster, really. So
Right.
And there's your expectations again, right?
And that transactional nature, right? Like
Right.
I'm going to get, will it the other person experiences that as emotional blackmail.
Mm-hmm.
The other person experiences that as, I'm being trapped. Like you're robbing the other person of their freedom if you're obligating them with a gift.
Right, right. And that kind
Okay.
of puts you in that power position again. You're
Yes.
you're expecting something back. I've given you something. Shouldn't I get something back? And so therefore you have that sort of prideful power position in a sense. So you have to let go of that. That's
And so
hard.
now the giver in that context, if that person were really trying to do what we're talking about doing, starts to notice the nature and the quality of his or her relationships. You know, the person who is feeling emotionally blackmailed, well, there's going to be a distance and boundaries that are going to start to be put in place, and you're going to find yourself becoming more and more isolated as you go forward. Those are the kinds of things that can be the cues and clues that can tell us we're out of balance and that our giving has now moved over into a toxic place. Given the given the context of the last 45-minute rabbit trail we've taken, this is good stuff. Let's read these two paragraphs that I was going to open with and see if now they kind of help lock in what we're trying to do going forward. Okay. So perceiving type in action. All of this suggests everything we've been talking about, that the first steps of self-transformation as you begin working with the Enneagram will be difficult. They require that you search for a sensation, feeling, and state of mind that you automatically avoid. This is totally counterintuitive. Why go looking for something that feels bad when you have already learned to escape awareness of its presence? This seems a recipe for insanity, not growth. The reason to go looking for one's passion is that it is the emotional engine that keeps the whole egoic self looking for a false payoff. For example, the passion for type 7 is gluttony. Gluttony is the yang energy behind the 7's continual need to taste a little of this, a little of that, always skittish about anything that looks slightly dull or painful. Gluttony fuels the 7's entire mental manner of processing experience, causing the person to move like a butterfly from idea to idea, from one pleasant option to another. Gluttony is the emotional component to the 7's mental conviction that suffering in any form, once entertained, will never go away. As long as it remains unconscious, that conviction can remain unchallenged and intact. Now, as you begin the work of self-transformation, you may discover that your passion is hard to find. First of all, you may not even know your type with any certainty. And actually, that's not a bad state of mind to be in. Many people quickly determine that they are this or that type, only to find out several years later that they were mistaken. Knowing your type is really less important than inquiring within about the energies and processes that motivate you. If the answer does not come quickly, do not worry. The inquiry will often be far more beneficial than the answer. So begin your inquiry with a search for the underlying feeling or motivation that drives your habitual behavior. Keep the list of 9 passions in the background at first and look for your own words, right, Becky? To describe your basic motives. If one of the 9 passions begins to emerge as a likely candidate, well, check it out with someone who knows you intimately. Don't rush to conclusions. And if you have friends who are somewhat familiar with the Enneagram, receive their suggestions gratefully, but with a grain of salt. If you have a trained Enneagram teacher available, go for a consultation. But always remember this: only you can discover what motivates you. Looking for that motivation at the innermost level is an important part of the process of self-transformation. Don't shortchange yourself. And if you think about what he's talking about here, this is exactly Jesus' teaching style. This is the inquiry is always more important than the answer. He's not going to give you the answer that you want, pithily stated, right? He's not going to do that. He's going to set you on another path of inquiry and try to break your sense of reasoning or certainty. And it's the same process that we're talking about here. Maybe let me see, where are we at? Yeah, we'll end with this next paragraph because it ends in another section. So as you begin to close in on your underlying passion, you will encounter a second difficulty: unwillingness to face it squarely. Often the best clue that one is about to hit pay dirt is a kind of sinking sensation in the stomach. Oh, not that. I think that's what Becky led us off with, right? If, for example, you are a 2, oh, Becky, here we go. At first, it may be humiliating to realize that you are run by a preoccupation over your own importance, hidden beneath constant attention to others' needs. Searching after your passion is truly difficult. The good results promised you are not only invisible, but at first they don't even sound worth the risk involved. So the first step in transformation with the Enneagram is the willingness to try something new. For many of us, this willingness comes only after we arrive at a point in life in which we realize that all our past attempts to make life manageable have failed and that we do not know what to do. This state of not knowing what else to do is often the only thing uncomfortable enough to make us willing to embark upon a path that brings immediate discomfort. We've talked about this, in the context of Jesus' teaching and Aramaic teaching over and over and over again. The program, the 12-step program, talks about we progress at the pace of pain. Something needs to make us uncomfortable enough to be able to embark on a journey that's going to make us uncomfortable, and even more so. And step 1 tells us that we have to admit that we are powerless and that our lives have become unmanageable. And this is what he says: realize all our past attempts to make life manageable have failed, and we don't know what to do. We're powerless. We need help. We need the community around us. We need to accept that there is a power greater than us that can and will restore our life to sanity. And if we just hitch our wagon to that, we can start to actually move. So all of this is restatement of what we have seen both in the recovery programs and Jesus' teaching and different places. And it's hopefully coming to a point where we see that this is the way forward.
If it makes anybody feel better, I think that most people I talk to when they first learn their Enneagram number, they typically want to appeal it. Because as soon as they learn the ick factor, they go, ew, I'm exposed. Oh no, is that really me? And so everybody feels that way when they see the dark side.
Ew.
I know I did.
I've discovered I don't really know what it feels like to feel the passion. And that's through many, many years of denying myself all those feelings, like all the negative emotions.
Mm.
Those are not godlike bills, so don't feel them.
Mhm.
So I have to go back and re-engage with all those negative emotions, which I no longer feel are negative, but they're difficult
Mm.
because you don't know what it feels like out of practice. But the moment you get it, everything changes.
What type do you think you are, Bill?
Well, I've been at least 4 different types so far. Currently, I'm working on type 4. I've come out of 812, and I don't remember what I was before that.
Mm,
Hmm.
interesting.
Very different numbers.
But I
If you're kind
also
of
think
landing on a 4, Bill.
Yeah, for this exercise, it's a 4.
Uh-huh.
But I also think observing, like it's been really good to be in the Bible study to hear some very intimate comments because, and observing people, because through my observations of others, and their victories, I start to learn like ways to dig myself out.
Mm.
And for instance, a friend of mine, he keeps his friends even though he has big disagreements with them. They have a lot of, a lot of people as you get older, they have a lot of anger, people who didn't save are 75 years old and have to work for the rest of their lives. They have a lot of anger and it just comes out. And it's like my friend is able to still stay friends with people that I'm like, wow, I don't know how I would be able to be a friend to an old friend who's just turned so angry. And yet I can see from the things he tells me that he says, I just have to give it to God. And he said, I tell them the truth, you're angry because you haven't saved and you're still working and I can't help you because that's in the past, but he tries to help them with whatever problem they are coming to him with. And I'm like, I would like to be like that. Somehow I just seem to judge people and then, it's like, wow, I sever friendships with people who aren't like me.
Mhm.
And I think that's a real, I can see where that's very limiting.
Mhm. Mhm. I think one of my favorite thoughts that came out of this group a few books back is this idea that only my ego can be offended by someone else's ego and vice versa. So every time I find some offense going on there, I'm not being guided by the Holy Spirit, right? I'm being guided by my own ego, my own sense of pride or whatever that might look like. And it's when I can get my ego out of the way, right? That's when I can see through the lens of love or see with grace and see past the offense that
And become unoffendable.
and become unoffendable. Yeah. Yeah.
That's why unoffendability is such it used to be originally such a high Christian value, because exactly what you're talking about there, William.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, if all this still seems a bit incomprehensible, there's another piece coming. Yeah, that we just stopped at it. If you look at it, it's the point of avoidance. So that's going to be another way for us to be able to help self-diagnose maybe and help us to get more of a handle on how our type is manifesting in our lives. And so he defines the point of avoidance as the point, the activity or behavior the type never engages in, at least not willingly. So there is a type that there is going to be an activity that because of your type, you are always going to want to avoid. And so if we can start to look at that, and then if the chart on the next page gives you that point of avoidance for each of the types, the passion and then the point of avoidance. So we'll read through that next week. And maybe that'll also help us to be able to put together a way forward for us that we can become more and more aware of what's going on in real time.
Yeah.
Which
And
is
Dave, just last thought that's been bouncing around in my head here is when we become offended, right? Like that the we're always right, right? Like I'm offended for a reason, right? Like I know why this other person is, doing something wrong. And I by holding on to my offense and continuing to view in that lens, I continue to hold on to my victimhood and I continue to hold on to their guilt. And that perpetuates the disconnection, if you will.
Yeah, as soon as you decide to be certain, then you got to defend it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is a good place to stop. And it looks like we lost. Oh, there he is. There's Scott. Okay.
I'm here.
And I just realized we never saw Danielle tonight because I was thinking Scott. I didn't see Scott, and Danielle's not here to be she is our second string prayer. So, but yeah, I'll have to check on Danielle, see if she's okay. All right, Scott, over to you, buddy.
Thank you, Lord, for this time together and it's time with you and all the sharing we do and the encouraging we do and the exploring we do. And there's a lot of fun, a lot of seriousness in some areas that we explore as well. But we're grateful for the fellowship and the time together and the discovery of what is capable and what's possible and what encourages us and what challenges us. So there's a lot on the table, Lord. We're really grateful for all that you do for us. We love you, Lord. It's in your precious and holy name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. This was a great session. Becky, did it help?
Help to confuse things.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We will see you on Sunday. Good night.
Good night, guys.
Bye, Kathy. Good night, Stevie.
Good night, all. Good night, good night, good night.
Good night, guys.
Good night, Scotty. Good night, Jordana.
Okay, see you Sunday.
See you Sunday, dear.